of Niroz, where 1 in 4 residents was either murdered or abducted on 7 October. I met survivors who carry unbearable loss and trauma. I acknowledge today's presence of Ilana Grzyzewski, who will speak today about her experience as a survivor of Hamas captivity, and I pay tribute to her immense courage and fortitude. I have also met with the family members of other hostages held by Hamas, including Eviatar David, who briefed this council recently. In my meetings, I could see unimaginable pain in their eyes. I was also impressed by their remarkable strength. The videos released by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad depicting emaciated Israeli hostages are deeply disturbing. The ill treatment and abuse of hostages constitute a blatant violation of international law. Hostages must be treated with dignity and allowed to receive visits and assistance from International Committee of the Red Cross. Mr. President, unthinkably, Gaza's population is now facing yet another deadly escalation. On 8 August, the Israeli government announced its decision to take over Gaza City. The resulting military operation is ongoing and, as we speak, for the population already struggling to survive, the Palestinians in Gaza are now seeing their worst fear becoming reality in front of their eyes. Already, 86% of the Gaza Strip lies within Israeli military zones. Expanded military operations in Gaza City will have catastrophic consequences, including displacement of hundreds of thousands. I am deeply alarmed by the findings of the latest IPC analysis, confirming that famine is engulfing the Gaza governorate. Ending famine is a race against time. It will require a dramatic increase in the quantity and quality of food entering Gaza. It will also require restoring the basic systems, such as water and sanitation, health services, food production, all what is needed to sustain human life. My colleague, Assistant Secretary General Msuya, will cover the IPC findings in more detail in her briefing. Mr. President, recent steps by Israel, including the 27 July announcement of a daily pause in operations in specific areas in western Gaza, and its approval on the 5th August of a mechanism for the controlled entry of commercial goods, have increased the supply of essential items to Gaza. Israeli authorities have also approved the entry of more diverse array of supplies, including animal feed materials starting this week. But let's be clear, these steps are nowhere near sufficient to address the vast scale of the needs. The lack of law and order also presents a significant obstacle to humanitarian operations. The unbearable conditions in Gaza have led to looting by desperate civilians, while looting by organized groups also continues to undermine relief efforts. It is imperative to restore the required condition for functional, community-based distribution systems to reach the most vulnerable. Israel's imposition of the new requirement on INGO registration is further constraining humanitarian response. With the deadline looming to meet the new requirements, many international non-government organizations operating in Gaza may be forced to cease their activities, leaving vulnerable communities without essential support. I urge the government to rescind the new registration requirement. All parties must allow rapid, safe, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid. Civilians, including humanitarian workers and those seeking aid, must be protected. Mr. President, for the sake of humanity, I urge all sides to put an end to this brutal war immediately. The only way to stop the immense and undescribable human suffering is through a full, immediate, and permanent ceasefire and the unconditional release of all hostages. Mr. President, the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continues to spiral dangerously downward. The territory envisaged for the future Palestinian state is shrinking, while a one-state reality of unlawful occupation and perpetual violence is rapidly advancing. During the reporting period, Israeli security forces continued operations in northern cities and refugee camps. More than 32,000 residents of three camps remain displaced as the result of these ongoing operations. They must be able to return to their homes and services, including those of UNRWA, which must be restored. In the West Bank, 9 Palestinians, including 4 children, were killed by the Israeli security forces during the reporting period. Attacks by Israeli settlers have continued, often in the presence of Israeli forces, resulting in 3 Palestinians killed, damage to Palestinian property, and displacement of Palestinians' families. Attacks by Palestinians against Israelis also continued, with no fatalities reported in the last month. On 28 July, Palestinian activist Auda Hathalin was shot and killed by a settler in Masafer Yatta, and his 5-year-old son Vatan stood by, witnesses his father's death. When visiting the family, I held Vatan in my arms and thought about enormous tragedy of his future life, without a father, and with his community facing the constant threat of violence and displacement. No child should face such horror. Perpetrators of settler violence must be held to account. Palestinians must be able to live safely on their land. Mr. President, since 7 October 2023, settlers' attacks have escalated in frequency and become more violent and deadly. These attacks have increasingly led to forced displacement. Frequently, settlers then move into areas that were fully displaced and establish outposts with the acquiescence of Israeli authorities. This leads to further settlement expansion and consolidation of Israeli control. Corresponding government decisions are fast-tracking settlement expansion, including in the most highly strategic areas. On 20th August, the Israeli High Planning Committee approved a plan on the construction of more than 3,400 housing units in the area EU1. If implemented, the move would effectively see a connection between the northern and southern West Bank. As such, it would undermine the possibility of a viable and contiguous Palestinian state. I urge Israel to immediately seize any steps towards construction in EU1 area and recall that all establishment of settlements violates international law. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities continue to demolish Palestinian-owned structures, leading to displacement of 175 Palestinians, including 70 children. These moves align with broader efforts to entrench control over the West Bank, including last month's decision by Israeli Knesset to adopt a non-binding and symbolic motion calling for the application of Israeli sovereignty across all settlements in the occupied West Bank. Alongside these developments, the Palestinian Authority continues to face an unprecedented economic crisis. According to the Palestinian Authority, since May of this year, Israel has not transferred any clearance revenue collected on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. Overall, more than $2 billion US dollars of Palestinian clearance revenues is withheld by Israel. The correspondent banking relationship with Israel is under constant threat, and accumulation of excess shekel in Palestinian banks has escalated into a systemic crisis. All this presents a grave threat to the Palestinian economy and banking system. If left unattended, it could threaten the viability of the Palestinian Authority. Mr. President, the developments I have described are taking place in a volatile regional context with violence and tensions continuing to plague the Middle East. This week alone saw another exchange of fire between the Houthis in Yemen and Israel, continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon, and IDF incursions in Syria. I welcome ongoing diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions and urge implementation of all relevant UN resolutions and existing agreements. Mr. President, this alarming picture compels us to act with determination to reverse the present trajectory, starting with the ceasefire and the release of all hostages. What is needed now is a bold action to resolve the conflict, end the occupation, and re-establish a political horizon. In this regard, I welcome the convening of the high-level conference on the implementation of two-state solution, co-chaired by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The message from the international community is clear. The two-state solution remains the only viable path towards just and lasting resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We must work collectively now to advance practical steps, including through our engagement at the upcoming UN General Assembly High-Level Week in September. With Gaza immersed in a situation so horrendous that it defies basic humanity, and with the West Bank facing genuine threats to its long-term existence, we can no longer wait. I thank you for your attention, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Alakbarov for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Mr. President, members of the Council, as I brief today, I'm reminded of previous messages we have delivered to this Council over the past months, cautioning that famine, then a worst-case scenario, was becoming increasingly likely. On 22nd of August, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Famine Review Committee confirmed that famine is now occurring in Gaza Governorate and is projected to expand further to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis by the end of September. Allow me to share some numbers. Over 500,000 people currently face starvation, destitution, and death. By the end of September, that number could exceed 640,000. Approximately 1 million people are in emergency IPC phase 4, and over 390,000 are in crisis IPC phase 3. Virtually no one in Gaza is untouched by hunger. At least 132,000 children under the age of 5 are expected to suffer from acute malnutrition between now and mid-2026. The number of those at risk of death among them has now tripled to over 43,000. For pregnant and breastfeeding women, that number is predicted to surge from 17,000 to 55,000. My colleague from Save the Children will speak in greater depth on this. The suffering of children remains one of the most heartbreaking dimensions of this crisis. Mr. President, behind these stark numbers are human lives, daughters, sons, mothers, and fathers, futures cut short and communities scarred. The Famine Review Committee has been called 5 times to assess food security and nutrition in Gaza. We sounded the alarm after each of these assessments. We also reported to the Council twice under Resolution 2417 on conflict and hunger, first in February 2024 and again in June this year. Let us be clear. This famine is not a product of drought or some form of natural disaster. It is a created catastrophe, the result of a conflict that has caused massive civilian death, injury, destruction, and forced displacement. Last month, over 100 Palestinians on average were killed every day, according to the estimates by Gaza's Ministry of Health, nearly twice the average daily toll recorded in May. In the same period, some 800,000 people were newly displaced, pushed into overcrowded areas that lack shelter and other essentials. This famine is also the result of 22 months of restricted and compromised delivery of essential humanitarian and commercial supplies, degraded health and nutrition systems, lack of adequate shelter, and broken water sanitation and hygiene networks, which have accelerated the spread of disease and turned menstrual hygiene into a nightmare for women and girls. The famine in Gaza is also the result of a destroyed food production system where 98% of the cropland is damaged or otherwise inaccessible, and where livestock is decimated, as ASG Alakbarov has just shared. Mr. President, we have seen an uptick in aid entering Gaza over the past weeks, including in the number of trucks and fuel tankers. During this time, the UN and our partners have brought in at least 12,000 metric tons of wheat flour, supported 80 kitchens serving 400,000 meals daily, brought in therapeutic food for 30,000 malnourished children for 1 month, delivered truckloads of vital medical supplies, including blood units, and ensured clean water reached over 1,000 locations, alongside hygiene kit distribution and network repairs. Limited commercial traffic has also resumed in the past weeks. This has helped to bring down prices of key commodities, although they remain elevated and largely out of reach for much of the population. And after a long pause, supplies of animal fodder have resumed over the past several days. These are important developments, but they will neither reverse famine nor stop it in its tracks. The needs of 2.1 million starving and hungry people, we need much, much more. We need to bring in and deliver greater volumes of life-saving assistance. We need the restrictions on essential items to be lifted, and we need a halt to the delays and denials that undermine our work every day. I would like to thank Mr. Alakbarov for his leadership as humanitarian coordinator on the ground, in particular for his ongoing engagements to address the serious constraints we are facing. Mr. President, international humanitarian law is a vital safeguard against hunger in conflict. It prohibits the use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and forbids attacks on objects essential to civilian survival, such as food, water, and agriculture infrastructure. It demands that the parties take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects throughout their military operation. It demands that humanitarian personnel and assets be protected at all times, and that the provision of unimpeded humanitarian relief be facilitated. There is still time to act. Mr. President, before I close, we must not forget the deterioration in the West Bank, where warlike military operations, settler violence, and discriminatory policies are deepening humanitarian needs and increasing civilian vulnerability. The recent approval of over 3,000 settler housing units under the E1 plan further threatens to fragment the West Bank and places 18 Bedouin communities representing over 3,500 people at risk of forced displacement, compromising their access to critical services. Mr. President and members of the Council, failure to act now will have irreversible consequences. This Council and all member states must immediately work to ensure an immediate, sustained cessation of hostilities in Gaza to prevent further loss of life and to stop famine from expanding. Second, the release of all hostages immediately and unconditionally. Third, the protection of civilians and critical infrastructure, including that which is essential for survival and the functioning of food, health and water, sanitation, and hygiene systems. Fourth, safe, rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access through all entry points and to all people in need across the Gaza Strip. This includes the delivery of immediate large-scale, multi-sectoral humanitarian assistance throughout the Strip, including items necessary for survival such as food and nutrition supplies, medicine, water and shelter, fuel and others. Fifth, the restoration of commercial flows of essential goods at scale, market systems, essential services, and local food production. Ending this human-made crisis demands that we act as if it were our mother, our father, our child, our family trying to survive in Gaza today. We must all do more and quickly. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank Ms. Nsuya for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Inga Ashing.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, the Gaza famine is here. An engineered famine, a predicted famine, a man-made famine. As we speak, children in Gaza are systematically being starved to death. This is a deliberate policy. This is starvation as a method of war in its starkest terms. So the children's clinics in Gaza are overwhelmed by need, every bench packed with malnourished children and their mothers. Yet our clinics are almost silent now. Children do not have the strength to speak or even cry out in agony. They lie there, emaciated, quite literally wasting away. Their tiny bodies overcome by hunger and disease. The medical and specialized nutrition supplies they need all but used up. Without these, malnourished children will die. A few kilometers away stand ready a sea of supplies. Thousands upon thousands of truckloads of life-saving items, all blocked. The government of Israel could end this famine tonight if it choose to, and then end its deliberate obstruction and let humanitarians do our work. Instead, there are reports of escalation in Israeli military activity in Gaza City, more attacks on hospitals, more killing. Mr. President, at our child-friendly spaces, children draw what we call wishing clouds so that they can imagine a better future. In Gaza, children used to wish for school or peace or to see their friends again. Once the total siege began in March, children would increasingly tell us that they wish for food, that they wish for bread. These past few weeks, more and more children have shared that they wish to be dead. One child wrote, "I wish I was in heaven where my mother is. In heaven there is love, there is food and water." Children are being killed in Gaza by bombs, bullets, and now starvation. An entire generation at risk of being wiped out. Every decision maker in every capital in the world, everyone in this room, has a legal and moral responsibility to act to stop these atrocities. Famine means that there are no more breaking points and no more alarm bells. It is the worst case scenario. We told you this was coming, loudly and clearly. It has been constructed by design for 2 years. Famine is a technical term. It is determined by an independent, globally respected body known as the IPC. When there is not enough food, children become acutely malnourished and then they die, slowly and painfully. This, in simple terms, is what famine is. By measuring a child's weight related to their height and their upper arm to assess the amount of body fat and muscle they have left, we can objectively measure in real time the slow descent into the horror of starvation. The lives of at least 132,000 children under the age of 5 in Gaza are now at risk of acute malnutrition. This number has doubled since May 2025. Every other indicator confirms the IPC's assessment. In the first 2 weeks of August, well over half of pregnant women and new mothers screened at Save the Children's clinics were malnourished. 7 times higher than before the siege began in March. We have since run out of the supplement designed to prevent pregnant women and new mothers becoming malnourished. Mr. President, this is the predictable results of a policy of a sustained siege on food, medicine, and fuel. This month, over 100 aid organizations called for an end to the weaponization of aid in Gaza. These NGOs have worked in the occupied Palestinian territories for decades and are trusted and experienced. Israeli authorities have rejected requests from dozens of NGOs to bring in life-saving goods to Gaza and have tied continuous operations to new registration rules. These registration rules require impartial humanitarian actors to take actions that are unlawful, unsafe, and incompatible with humanitarian principles. The result is the further obstruction to unhindered, principled humanitarian access. Children in Gaza do not need so-called creative solutions, not airdrops that deliver almost no aid while occasionally hitting and killing civilians, nor creating inhumane militarized distribution systems where hundreds of civilians have been killed seeking food, forcing those who survive to choose between being maimed and humiliated collecting scraps of food or watching their loved ones waste away before their eyes. Families we support increasingly refer to these distribution points as the jaw of death. Instead, children in Gaza need member states to take action. Cruel and illegal siege, block on the UN-led humanitarian system, mass killing of humanitarian workers, ban on UNRWA, and obstruction and threats of deregistration against NGOs are driving the humanitarian catastrophe, which in its turn is causing famine. Independent entities mandated to conclude and determine whether atrocity crimes and war crimes are taking place have done so. In addition, grave violations against children are being committed at an unprecedented rate across the occupied Palestinian territory, according to the Secretary General's annual report. The overwhelming majority were perpetrated against Palestinian children, though there are violations against Israeli children too, including children being taken hostage. Every child has the right to survival, to safety, and to a future. Any violation is a breach too far. Violence in the West Bank have been escalating at an alarming rate. Children face home demolitions, displacement, harassment, and intimidation by Israeli forces and settlers, including on the way to and during school. The mental health toll this has on their still forming minds is devastating. Save the Children is particularly alarmed by the detention of Palestinian children in the Israeli military detention system, which is a long-standing child rights crisis. No child should ever come in contact with a military court. Yet Palestinian children are the only ones in the world who are systematically prosecuted in military courts. These courts do not meet international juvenile justice standards. It is an abusive, inhumane system where children consistently report being physically, emotionally, and sexually abused, humiliated, and starved. Children held in this system must be released immediately to prevent further harm and protect them from practices that could amount to torture. The military detention of Palestinian children must end. There must be accountability for all crimes committed against children, against civilians, and hostages. Mr. President, children in Gaza urgently need the following: an immediate and definite ceasefire and the release of all children deprived of their liberty, including hostages and children held in military detention. The government of Israel must lift the siege and let the aid flow. The only way to achieve this is through unimpeded UN-led coordination. Member states must take action, support accountability mechanisms, end armed transfers, refuse to fund militarized aid schemes, do not risk complicity in atrocities. Members of the Security Council, I would like to conclude by explaining briefly what malnourishment and starvation means for a child. After one day without food, children begin to change. They suffer a loss of energy, concentration, and become upset. After several days without nourishment, their body starts to degrade. Their bodies begin consuming their own fat to survive. They lose their appetite and become unable to focus. After 2 weeks, the process accelerates and their small bodies rapidly deteriorate. Heart, liver, kidneys weaken, infections spread with ease as their immune system collapses. They become vulnerable to diarrhea, pneumonia, sepsis. At this stage, there is no fat left, so the body begins to literally consume itself, slowly, painfully eating the muscles and other vital organs. Belly swell and skin becomes fragile. At 3 weeks, the process of starvation has reached its final catastrophic phase. Children get lesions on their eyes and they go blind. Their hair fall out, organs shut down. Unable to move or speak or cry out, they draw their last breath. Those who do get urgent nutrition and medical support often grow up stunted. A stunted child will likely have impaired cognitive development, a weakened immune system, and increased risk of chronic diseases. Babies born to malnourished mothers are likely to be forever smaller themselves. Many effects of famine cannot be reversed. The death and loss, the physical and mental harm will last lifetime and even generations. In the words of a nutrition nurse who works in one of our silent clinics, she said, "Hunger is written on the bodies of our children, a constant reminder that survival itself has become uncertain in Gaza." For almost 2 years, the international community has failed to protect Palestinian children. Until you choose to act, this is the fate you are guaranteeing a generation of children in Gaza. Inaction is a choice. Indecision is complicity. Children have reached their breaking points. Where is yours? Thank you.
Thank Ms. Ashing for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Ilana Gritsevsky.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, ambassadors. Estoy hoy aquí.
I am here today, before you, not just to raise my voice, but also for those who are not able to be here today. Those who have still been kept hostage, or those who were brutally assassinated. My name is Ilana Gritsevsky. I was born in Mexico into a Jewish family, profoundly connected to Israel. My home was always full of traditions and customs linked to Israel. One of my memories of childhood is to understand the work undertaken by many international organizations such as the UN and UNICEF. When I was in school, we always proudly promoted the values that I had learned from the institutions. However, I'm now here and I'm wondering, where were these organizations when I needed them most?
I made Aliyah to Israel by myself. That decision was driven from my need to feel safe. Safe in a country which is free of danger from delinquents and cartels. A country where I can feel connected to my people, its culture, and have a future. Leaving everything behind wasn't easy, but I knew I was on the right path. Near us, a kibbutz near the border with Gaza, I built a home with my partner, Matan Sangauker. Our life was simple, ordinary, full of plans. I owned a bakery, and later I was a manager of a greenhouse. Until October 7, shattered everything. At 6:30 in the morning, my life changed forever. That morning, Matan and I were sleeping at home. surrounded by everything we love. Within minutes, terror was upon us. We wake up to sirens like every time before, without imagining that this time it was not just sirens. It was an attack.